Hi, I'm Sean Samson. I'm President and CEO of EVNi Incorporated. I'm joined here today by Paul Davis, my VP of Exploration for EVNi. EVNi is a company which has a large land package southeast of Timmins, Ontario, and we're searching for nickel sulfides. It's in an area where there's been historic production. We're very close to the city of Timmins, and we have a huge land package we're exploring across. We'll talk you through that today. And we have a two-track strategy wherein we have high-grade mineralization, and we're going after some very large-scale targets in our north as well. So we're looking at near-term or nearish term production from our high-grade mineralization, plus we've got an enormous optionality from our large-scale targets. Looking forward to getting through it today with you, Merlin.
Sean, thank you very much for the introduction. Good to meet you both. And looking forward to learning more about the projects and the work that you're doing within EVNi. So EVNi, it's a very Canadian name. You call the company what you're focused on. You have nickel for electric vehicles. What was the background to that? What made you want to go for those nickel assets? Because from what I can gather, the company behind it, or the founding company, had a kind of a variety of different strategies in some industrial minerals. But at some point, there was a switch to nickel and those nickel properties. So if you could just tell me a bit about the background of EVNi, that'd be great.
Yeah, EVNi's genesis, it came out of another company called Rogue Resources, which Paul and I also run. This is a non-core asset that we spun out from Rogue last year into a private company in March of 2021. And we did some initial work in 2021. We had a historic resource for 2010, so no work had been done on it since 2010. When we spun it out, we did work last year, and then we IPO'd it in December of 2021. And here we are, we're midway, or almost done, our third phase of work. So we were busy exploring in the first half of this year, our phase 2. And now we're deep into our phase 3, which we'll talk you through today. But the genesis of the company is really that we spun out this non-core asset from Rogue Resources. And then since then, we've bolted on additional couple land packages, which has now created this very large piece of land that we're working.
Now, I love a high-grade resource. I'm always willing to chase grade above tons. Ideally, you get both. But the historic resource that you were working on from 2010, that was a relatively small tonnage, but high-grade nickel resource. Could you just tell me what that resource was, what the geology was, and what the work you've done on that?
Paul, do you want to walk us through sort of where we started with our little under 700,000 ton resource?
Sure, I'll start there. Basically, I'll give you a little brief background on the history. First, my personal history. I've been a explorer in Timmins for about 30 years, looking for nickel in a gold camp. I've had a fair bit of success. I found 6 new zones of mineralization, advanced 1 through to production, the Alexo mine, and basically the focus of my exploration was these high-grade targets. Now, in 2007, Golden Chalice, a former name for Rogue, discovered W4 by drilling in the Shaw Dome, and basically drilled off this deposit down to about 200 to 250 meters depth that had 677,000 tons of about 1% nickel, some of which was accessible by an open pit. W4 is a unique deposit in that it's composed almost 100% of pentlandite. So you're looking at a really high nickel tenor of 35 to 45% nickel and 100% sulfide.
When you say it's unique, is that because of the mineralogy, because it's pentlandite, not pentlandite and pyrrhotite? And I mean, is it the mineralogy that's unique, or is it the structural setting?
It's the mineralogy that's unique. Being 100% pentlandite, like I say, when you look at a project that when you get a concentrate, you'll be able to produce a really high grade concentrate from this particular sulfide. And most of these nickel deposits, even the komatiite hosted ones, tend to have a fair proportion of pyrrhotite, and your nickel tenors range in anywhere from about 5 to 10% nickel and 100% sulfide. Also, what's unique about W4 is it's associated with a non-magnetic pyrrhotite flow. And so it actually brings in a brand new model for exploration in the Shaw Dome that has never been searched for before.
Sorry, a non-magnetic what flow? Periditic
flow. So it's olivine-rich flow that is really the host for most of these style deposits. Like when you see them in West Australia at Kambalda, we call it a Kambalda-style deposit because you get these concentrations of sulfide that kind of build up in the bottom of river-like channels, and they have a long-lived plunge extent, but a short aerial extent. Like, W4 ranges anywhere from about, we'll call it 200 meters to 250 meter strike extent. But so far, it just continues trucking down plunge, as I think you'll see from this morning's press release that we put out, that we had some fairly good results from our phase 2 drilling the extension of W4.
Well, I'll come on to those results in a second, but let's talk. When you talk about the Kambalda style deposits, do you mean komatiitic, these very hot flows that actually kind of gouge a channel through kind of pre-existing rock, and so they're kind of, they're rivers of extremely hot molten lava that come with this metal flow, and the metals concentrate at the base of that flow.
Yeah, that's correct. I think I've been told by a number of komatiite specialists that they have about the viscosity of hot olive oil. So these things really do run, and they channelize into these river type deposits. So what happens is you get some entrainment of sulfur from somewhere, be it the footwall at the Shaw Dome where we have these sulfide bearing iron formations, or in Kambalda it was more of a graphitic argillite sediment that had sulfides. And what it does is it entrains the sulfur. The sulfur strips the nickel and the other metals out of the melt, and then it drops to the bottom because the sulfides are denser than your flow magma.
Okay, nice. Can you pull up a map of the main areas, because I'm learning so much about the geology just from what you're saying. I'd like to put it in context, geographic context, if I could. Sean, are you the glamorous assistant?
Let me pull up the map, Merlin. Yeah, so this orients you a bit. So this, Merlin, is the original in yellow, is the original project that was spun out from Rogue last year. And then that's where our W4 is. So you see at the bottom of the yellow section is the W4 zone we're speaking about, with the historic resource. And then on here, you have the blue and the red, which are the additional land that we've bolted on with the transaction we did in April of this year with a private company, our neighbor across the street, as we refer to them. And that really supersized our land package across the Shaw Dome. And this is all, just to orient you, we're southeast of Timmins, so south of some famous gold mines, including the Dome mine, currently operated by Newmont. So a short drive from town. And then across the Shaw Dome, we have 2 permitted mills. So there's the Carshaw Mill in the north, which is permitted, yeah.
I was going to say, can you point to it with your mouse?
I could try. Yeah, right on here.
Yeah, great.
So
Thank
the
you.
Carshaw Mill. So that's a permitted mill. It doesn't operate, but we have a ROFR, a right of first refusal, to acquire the land that mill is on. But there's another functioning mill, the Redstone Mill, which is permitted for 2,000 tons per day and operates now as a opportunistic toll milling facility. So there's 2 processing options to some extent down on the Shaw Dome. And then what really excites us is that there is, and this gets back to the geology and the flows, there's historic production from the Shaw Dome with really good grade, where over time in various sort of nickel markets, juniors have been down, companies have been down producing nickel out of the Shaw Dome, which of course the best place to look for metal is where metal has been produced before. So we've got that going at the Shaw Dome. Plus we've got this very interesting geology, which our team thinks that with the sequential flow type geology, that we're just getting started in what we're going to be finding here with both the high grade mineralization down to the south of the land package where we are. Plus we have a huge opportunity to the north for potential large scale.
And if I could add here that, again, with the Kambalda style of deposits, that once you find one high-grade nickel deposit on a horizon, that means that entire horizon becomes perspective. And you tend to find these deposits in clusters, which you're seeing here on the Shaw Dome as well, with a number of zones occurring within that belt.
Paul, those historic mines, I can see Langmuir 2, Langmuir number 1 mine, number 2 mine, the Redstone mine, McWaters mine. Are those all also Kambalda style, komatiitic?
Yeah,
flows?
they are more than 2 million tons of better than 1.5%, almost 2% nickel. Langmuir number 2, they mined a little over 1 million tons at 1.5% nickel, and they basically stopped the mine at about 400 meters depth. Not because the nickel stopped at that depth. I have maps that actually show the mineralization continuing down plunge, but the nickel price kind of fell out of bed in 1978. They had a ground control problem in their crown pillar, and Noranda and Inco decided to shut the mine down at that point and basically rehabilitate the area. But we do own a portion of that deposit.
Paul, how have you done your exploration in this area? You say you've been doing nickel exploration in the Timmins area for 30 years, and obviously Noranda and the guys were doing nickel exploration in the 70s and 80s. You know, what have been your methods, and have they changed much? And what are you applying those to? Well, let's get to how did you explore? Let's do that first. How did you explore? And we'll come on to what you're doing now later. But let's do the looking backwards first.
Okay, basically how we explored hasn't changed a lot. And really, one of my first jobs in nickel was in the Shaw Dome in Carman Township for Falconbridge. So this is my third kick at the can. The second time I was with Outokumpu, where I was actually the Eastern Canada exploration manager. And we went in with a much more systematic approach. We flew a large airborne, which included both EM and MAG. And then we you try and pick your best EM targets with an associated MAG high, which you would believe would be your channelized pertites, which would be more magnetic than your more lateral flow facies. And then we would go in and you'd have to drill it. These Kambalda style deposits, like I said, are very limited strike extent. So really it is drilling into the ground. Now, Golden Chalice flew an airborne over the yellow part of that map. Then, also the company that we bought the project from flew an airborne over their side of the project. We have since combined the two, had it reinterpreted, because the real game changer now is the computing power. Your actual measurements from the airborne haven't improved a lot over the past 10, 15 years, but your ability to apply the algorithms, run the computing power, select your high priority targets really has. And so that's what we've done, is we've gone in, we've reselected priority targets based upon our understanding of the Shaw Dome and Kambalda style deposits to start to pick our high priority targets. And the first one we did was actually on the Langmuir project, and I had them do it blind because I wanted to see if they would find W4, and they did highlight W4 as one of our top 5 exploration targets. So I was happy with the result and felt it was going to help. Other things that have come to note is that these Kambalda style deposits are off-time deposits. Go ahead.
So these. I missed that last bit. These Kambalda style deposits are
that they live through the off time during the geophysical surveys. So a lot of the conventional work has always been looking for conductors when you turn on the power. Whereas with these high grade nickel deposits, they tend to have a very long life magnetic field. So you have to measure them through the off time or the B field. And really that can help you select which targets that you would prioritize to explore first. But really, with the amount of overburden in Timmins and the lack of other information from surface, it really is drilling. And so it's picking our high priority targets, going in and drill testing these to do follow-up work for the high grade targets.
So that was going to be my next question, which is kind of how much overburden is there in the Shaw Dome? And, is there any exposure, or are you totally reliant on the drill data and the geophysics?
There is outcrop exposure in the area. Basically on our CarLang, which is one of our large scale deposits, we probably have anywhere from about 15 to 20% outcrop exposure, which gives us a huge advantage in being, one, able to tell what the rock types are, and two, there's historical work there, including surface grab samples that show that we have a really nice higher nickel content dunite than, let's say, what you're seeing from the other deposits within the Timmins area. Now, like, overburden cover, CarLang, I bet you we average anywhere from 5 to 8 meters. But, like, a lot of our drilling so far, we've only seen a maximum of about 7 meters of overburden. In comparison to other parts of the Abitibi, like, you're looking at anywhere between 20 to 50 meters of overburden. Other parts of the Shaw Dome, let's say at W4, it goes anywhere from surface outcrop exposure near to the mineralization to depths of about 20 to 25 meters. So generally, it's a range, and it really depends on where you are within the area and how the glaciers affected the overburden and the outcrop.
And you're talking about the importance of the geophysics, the combined EM and the mag. You said that when you were doing the historic exploration, you would go for the where there was a mag high, but yes. Earlier you mentioned that the peridotite flow at W4 has actually got a kind of a subtler low mag signature. Have you identified that yet?
We basically, the Shaw Dome is made up like a layer cake, and we have 4 separate horizons of komatiites that we can explore. And when you take in aggregate the amount of favorable stratigraphy that we could test, it's in excess of 100 kilometers of areas to target. So we have identified other targets that we see as similar to W4, being in a similar geophysical environment, similar geological environment. We have not started testing for those. We've been focused in on getting W4 scaled up and see what the dimensions and size of the deposit potentially could be, as well as testing our higher grade zone or large scale project up in CarLang.
If you could just kind of unpack for me what the work you've done on W4. So I'm just trying to kind of, I learn by repetition, so I'm just trying to get my head around it. You've got the geophysics, you've got the signature of the key horizons of the komatiites within the shore zone. You've got over 100 kilometers of kind of a priority horizon that you might want to test, kind of line kilometers, because these things are relatively rope-like or relatively linear. And you're focused on the extensions of W4. So that 677,000 ton resource was over how much of strike length? And is it kind of is it like a pipe? And how much more have you tested?
Basically at W4, it ranges anywhere from about 150 meter to 200 meter strike. And the 677,000 tons were really contained in the first 250 meters of the depth along that strike length. And so it is associated with what appears to be a channelized type deposit. So it's not really a pipe. It's more like a bit of a bowl that has a plunge down to either the south or the southeast. And it dips near vertical or slightly to the north. And so basically we've went in 2021 and we'd never seen the deposit. I'd never seen the mineralization. So first thing we did is we drilled a couple holes into the middle of it within gaps within the actual resource estimate so that we were improving our information that we had there and hoping to improve the grade and the style of mineralization within the resource. We also drilled it on the east and the west end, because we wanted to see if we could extend the boundaries of the mineralization further east and west. And we did have some decent hits on both edges of the deposit. We have tested both to the west and to the east of the actual known mineralization. And we did find to the west, about 75 to 100 meters away, that we had a small hit indicating that this particular horizon is still sulfur saturated and that you have the potential of hosting additional mineralization on this stratigraphic package. Work by Golden Chalice between 2007 and 2010 also identified the W2 zone, which had a really nice hit of about 1 meter of about 1.5% nickel at a depth of about 350 meters vertical. They did some follow-up work, but there hasn't been a lot of exploration done around that other hit. So we see that this horizon is prospective. And we do know that it swings up to the northeast along the edge of the Shaw Dome. And basically we have a number of targets. Some were tested by Golden Chalice, but with one hole. And as I know with these Cambalda-style deposits, you put in one hole, it doesn't really kill your area. Basically, you have to do a few holes on each target to make sure that there isn't something there.
So what's actually happening at W4? Are you expanding the envelope of mineralization? Has the drilling supported that thesis? And are you putting more meters into that area?
What we've done is in phase 2, we drilled the down plunge extension of W4. There was
in the
some
first half of this year.
Yeah, first half of this year. There was some indication that the mineralization went to depth, but they had drilled it from the south, so it was a very poor angle to hit the deposit at. We came in from the north, we drilled 10 additional holes, and basically we have extended the mineralization down to below the 400-meter level. So we basically doubled the depth of the deposit. And a couple of very interesting things came out of that drilling. One, in the original 2010 resource, they had broken it up into a number of small lenses because they didn't really have a strong handle on the morphology of the mineralization. With our drilling from the north, I'm confident to say now that this is actually one continuous zone from surface. So you can stretch it down the full length of the 400 meters versus having it kind of pinch and swell into these 3 separate lenses. And the second thing that we see is that the mineralization maintains a fairly consistent width and grade as we go down to depth, which, like I said, if you take a look at our press release today, in a number of the holes, we've had some very interesting hits, some upwards of 20 meters of 0.85% nickel with a core of 5 meters of a little close to 2%. So we're quite excited by the potential to expand W4. And basically with these Cambalda style things, we can, I envision that we'll be able to keep chasing this thing down plunge and extending and increasing the size potential.
Nice. That's a really good result. So are you keeping one rig going on W4, and have you got a kind of a drill budget that you're trying to complete by the end of the year?
We wanted to see what the results were, of course, from the assays before we went on to the next phase at W4. We're only drilling with one drill. The company that we're working with up in Timmins has done a phenomenal job for us, and they drill probably at about 20% faster than I thought they were capable of doing. And so basically, in order to maintain our treasury and not to burn through it really quickly, we're drilling with one drill, and we are almost finished our drilling in phase 3 on CarLang, which point we might take a little bit of a pause, kind of get caught up. But I'm looking at being back in at W4, increasing or decreasing the drill spacing and moving our next phase into actually doing an indicated level of drilling on that particular portion so that we can go to an updated resource estimate sometime early 2023 to be able to say exactly what we have at W4 down to that next level of 450 to 500 meters depth.
So Merlin, we've been bouncing back and forth. First half of this year was doing the W4 extension. Those are results that we're talking about now. And then this summer, we've been drilling up at the CarLang for the large scale target, which will be news for the remainder of this year, assays from the work we did this summer. And then, as Paul says, we're going to come back to W4 for that infill drilling to be able to have an indicated resource as our target for next year on W4.
Great. I've got it. Before we leave W4, I noticed that some of the mines in the area are small but high grade. They're kind of 1 million tons, 1.5 million tons. You've got almost 700,000 tons of good grade material at W4. You're potentially looking to double it. I mean, plus or minus, thumb sucks and kind of arm waving around, but that's the ballpark that you'll be looking at. Those old mines, those small old mines, do you have a kind of in your mind a kind of conceptual threshold of how many tons you need to kind of stimulate a construction decision? I mean, just kind of as a guideline.
Yeah, so for development of the ore bodies, what I really like is that we have processing just 7 kilometers away. There's the permitted 2,000 ton per day plant. So I would foresee that today what we have, less than 700,000 tons, is probably subscale, but a combination of larger resource at a W4, which we're hoping to have next year, plus there's a deposit privately held by our neighbors. It's 3.5 kilometers away on surface, which is about double the size of W4, which also has some exploration potential to have a larger resource. It probably gets us closer to that threshold where perhaps in combination, those two deposits could change back the local plant, the local mill, to being a nickel operation. So those are the sort of the chips that are in play. But to your question of threshold, I think we're probably south of that now. It's less than 700,000 tons towards a potential development decision. But what we're trying to do is get as many resource tons as we can on the board for W4. And then, as you state, there are other deposits and historic mines in the area where we should be able to bolt something together to get us over that threshold.
Great. Thank you very much. Now let's talk about CarLang, this your large tonnage potential. Paul, do you want to give us kind of an introduction to the geology and to kind of what you're looking for?
Sure. Basically the Shaw Dome, as I said, is like a layer cake. Now the innermost layer is composed of these thick accumulations of olivine cumulate, so dunites. And basically, in the 1990s, I commissioned a study with the University of Alabama to do a Shaw Dome-wide geochemistry project to basically try and identify areas where you would see nickel depletion. Now, of that, in the CarLang area, we were able to take about 40 samples from surface, and it showed that, we have a range of nickel contents anywhere from about 0.25% nickel up to about 0.4. So basically, that's a huge head start when we're looking at these large-scale, lower-grade type of zones. Now, we went in there with that information. With the geophysics, we also know that we had a strike length of probably about 10 kilometers within the CarLang area of this favorable stratigraphy. And then the kicker is that in 1996, when I was with Outokumpu, I actually drilled the north end of CarLang and knew that we had dunites there and bottomed the last hole in a fence in about 350 meters of dunite, and it was still going when we shut down the hole. Our target with Outokumpu, though, we were looking for something of 0.6, like Mount Keith. Here, we had grades of between 0.3 and 0.4, and so we moved on to the next target. Now, there's really 4 points that make CarLang quite attractive. With my work in Timmins in the 30 years, I've really pretty much looked at every nickel zone in the Abitibi on this side of the Quebec border, plus drilled any number of them. And I feel that now what makes CarLang different is, one, location. We're close to Timmins, and we're close to processing. So we have a source of services and people, and we also have facilities that we could process material at. Second thing is access. A lot of the areas in the Abitibi are quite swampy, quite wet. Access is difficult to get to. We can drive to our drill rig with a pickup truck because over the past 5 years, we've had some recent forestry activity, and they built a really nice network of roads going right across the ridge that happens to cover the CarLang area. Third thing is grade. We know from the University of Alabama work and some past geochemistry completed by the Ontario government that we're looking at things that are potentially let's say 20 to 30% higher grade than some of the other zones that have been announced for the area. And then the last and final thing is the overburden thickness. So really you're looking at your upfront capital cost that the Timmins area has on average between 20 to 40 meters of overburden. So you're looking at digging through a lot of stuff even before you would start producing anything that could be considered a pay zone from that particular deposit. So I think CarLang, the difference is going to be these deposits are fairly common. It's going to be those 4 factors that will decide which project is actually going to be developed and moved ahead first versus being put on the sidelines.
So Roland, this point, Merlin, that the grades of these deposits, like Paul mentioned before, they didn't find 0.6, so Outokumpu moved on. Now the market seems to be telling us that lower grade deposits could be economic. I think that's still a TBD. But when you're beginning to compare these lower grade large deposits, it's really going to come down to variables like Paul's saying. Like if you're going to be mining something that has the equivalent of, glorified dirt, you going through a lot of dirt to get to that dirt really adds up, right? So we think comparatively ours stacks up well, but first we're drilling it. We're going to try to put up a large resource on this target area. Again, that will be early next year, and then we'll figure out sort of how they compare. But we think there are big differences between these deposits, as Paul's saying. That overburden is a big deal.
Yeah, Sean, and it's not just the overburden. I mean, I completely agree with you when you say that the economics of some of these things as TBD, because if you look at the recoveries, my goodness, you're talking about 50-odd% recovery on a low grade. I mean, if you're
already starting with
0.25% nickel, contain nickel, and you can recover 0.11 or 0.9. I mean, it's like, oh my goodness. And you're looking at $1 billion capex. I do worry. I do worry.
Yeah.
But if you can find stuff which is 0.3, 0.4, and if half of that is you're at 0.2%, which is suddenly it's a vast improvement. I mean, even then you want the nickel market to go in the right direction, which of course everybody who's listening to this will have bought into that thesis, so we don't really need to discuss it. But absolutely, these parameters that you talk about, access, processing. Paul, I'd be very interested to hear if you've got any comments on the mineralogy or the specific geology of grade or recoveries, if you've got any insights at this stage.
I have some insights. Basically, when you serpentinize an olivine, you drive all of the nickel out of the crystal structure. And so it needs to find a home. And so a lot of the theory around it, and we see this at CarLang as well, is that the nickel is going into any sulfur that's available in the system. And so you're seeing your higher tenor nickel minerals such as pentlandite, millerite, hazelwoodite, which is a kind of a neat mineral. You're also seeing the development of some oarite, which is your iron nickel alloy. That if you are deficient in sulfur, that's kind of the home that the nickel will find.
And any reference to CarLang? I mean, have you got any kind of favourable features there which kind of give you because quite a lot of the grades locally are 0.25, 0.3%, and you're talking about 0.3 to 0.4%. So there must be some kind of geological difference which is lifting that, or is it just fluid flow?
I believe it is actually original olivine content. In that, we're looking at an add cumulate, which is anything that has over 95% olivine, and we see a high volume of these add cumulates or dunites within the area, and I think that's what makes the main difference. You may have had a little bit more primitive magma as well, so you're looking at something that would have an originally elevated nickel content prior to it starting to crystallize out the olivine.
Okay, now. I've got slightly rusty Igneous petrology, but isn't a dunite a rock which has got over 90% olivine?
It is, yeah.
Hey, I got one right.
Not so rusty after all.
Good. So where are you in the drill program? How many meters have you done, and how many meters ahead do you have?
Basically, we've completed probably about 90% of our drilling on CarLang. It was an 8,500 meter program in total. We're moving on to our last line, and so we're going to be starting to receive some of our analysis back here over the coming weeks. And basically, it's about a 4 to 5 week delay between submitting the samples and getting the assays back. With the rate at which the drillers are drilling, we're a bit behind on logging, so we're seeing it getting caught up on that by about the end of October, and then we'll continue to see results starting probably end of September right through into the end of the year for CarLang, at which point we will then turn it over to our third-party arm's length group to see what they think of the CarLang as a zone and see what type of resource we can generate from it. But our target, based upon the volumes and the known widths from the surface mapping, is going to be somewhere probably around, we'll say, north of 500 million tons.
Okay. Okay. And that's a big number. What's your fence spacing on your lines of your drilling that you're putting across this? And how much strike have you drilled out?
Basically, our fences are spaced every 200 meters. And we spoke with the qualified geo who will be doing any type of work on it, and basically came to an agreement that that is a reasonable drill spacing to be able to work out our indicated resource. And basically, we've completed testing on about 1.2 kilometers of the actual dunite body.
And Paul, up in the CarLang, we think we have about 10 kilometers.
Up in the CarLang, we believe there's about 10 kilometers of this particular dunitic unit that goes across that area.
So Merlin, this will hopefully get us with putting a resource on the board for CarLang, indicated resources Paul mentions, and then we'll try to figure out sort of how much more there is to find up there, and then how the potential pieces fit together and whether that's of interest for us to advance. And that's really our second track for the company.
I mean, that's huge. I mean, that would be a significant step change for the company.
Sure.
Quick, the 10 kilometers of strike length, is that based on the similar geophysical signature? Do you see any attenuation of the signature? I mean, have you drilled in the best bit, or did you just drill it in the bit that you got the access to first?
We tried to target the area that we believed was going to be most contiguous of the dunite. We have surface outcrop, though, that basically goes along that entire 10-kilometer trend. There's some diabase dikes in the area. There is some attenuation in there. It is the Archean. We have a fair amount of structure within that particular place, but we chose an area that had a good continuity. We have a number of these type of targets within our property package, not only in CarLang, but also on Adams Deloro
to the west
property as well.
Yeah,
on the west side, which I happen to also drill with Otoponku.
And what did you find there? Similar stuff?
Similar stuff, yeah. We have dunites that we intersected in the drill holes to surface over on the western side of our property package as well.
Similar grades?
Similar grades, right, Paul?
Similar material, yeah.
So Merlin, the dynamic here is, Paul has this rich history up in the Timmins camp, having been the person looking for nickel for many years in the gold camp. And now with the more recent investor interest in companies that are crawling over and exploring the same land that Paul spent a huge chunk of his career on, he's been chomping at the bit to get back in. Because he drilled them and he knows these deposits where we are, especially down in the Shaw Dome. But now the market is in a way telling us that a bunch of this mineralization could be economic. So again, as we discussed, I think it's still a TBD. But it seems with the push towards decarbonization and nickel price and maybe innovations on how we get the stuff out of the ground, that this stuff could come into the money. If it is seen as economic, we think we have enormous potential across our land package. And it's really neat because Paul's drilled it before. We know the geology very well, and we're going to methodically go through the steps. So first step is doing these meters that we put in for CarLang, get the resource on the board beginning of next year. And then we'll sort of go from there and try to figure out if they're a go. And I think it's a tremendous option for our company to have this type of business alongside the high grade business that we're working down in the southern part of our land, including the W4.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Sean, you've summarized it beautifully. Paul and Sean, thank you very much for taking the time. I've learned, it's been a real eye-opener for me to learn about the geology of the Shaw Dome and the bulk tonnage potential and the high grade potential. I look forward to seeing the news releases coming out over the coming months. And we should, I think, probably do another technical call when you've got some resources on hand, which it sounds as if it's going to be 6 months or so away. Yeah, so we've done very soon. We'll have
completed the drilling on CarLang, so the large-scale target to the northeast. And then it'll just be assays coming back on that. That is really going to be our news flow for the next bunch of months. The news we came out with this week was the final assays from work the first half of this year on the W4. We're going to get back in on the W4 at the end of this year, calendar year, to get more holes in. And then that will give us the data we need for an updated indicated resource next year. So a lot of reports, a lot of news flow coming out with assays over the next few months. And then, as you say, we're targeting these a larger resource on W4 and a maiden resource on CarLang in 2023. So we look forward to talking to you about that as we get the data.
Great. Until then, thank you very much and good luck.
Great. Thanks, Marlon.